So welcome everybody. Fantastic to have so many people here. I'm just going to mute everybody, if that's okay. Welcome. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jaron. I'm a museum curator at the University of Dundee, and I'm also secretary of the Tayside Museums Forum. And we're delighted to have a whole raft of different curators and other museum staff from across Tayside to tell you about some of the various fascinating items that we have in our museums. So the Tayside Museums Forum is a membership body that represents all the various museums across the Tayside region. So that's the 3 local authorities of Dundee, Angus and Perth and Kinross. And obviously some of our museums have been able to reopen, some have yet to reopen, but of course it has been a really tough time for museums, as indeed it has been for everybody, and particularly for the many independent museums that we have in Tayside, who obviously really rely on visitor income. So, you know, as soon as those museums that have reopened and those that will soon be reopening, do go and visit them as soon as you possibly can, because they really need your support. We've got lots of talks to get through, and we're going to try and be fairly strict about time. So we've asked everyone to speak for 5 minutes, and suddenly everyone got really excited there. 5 minutes, and this is the great thing about having the power of mute, is that if people are still rabbiting on long after that time, then we will mute them and we will carry on. But hopefully we won't have to do that, because I'm sure everyone will be really good at keeping to time. We're not going to have time for people to answer questions directly, so what we're going to do is we're going to ask people to actually answer the questions directly in the chat. So do ask your questions and then look for the answers in the chat. We've got 16 talks altogether, so lots to get through, but what we'll do is we'll have 8 talks and then we'll have a break, and then you can go make a cup of tea, nipsaloo, whatever you need to do, and then we'll carry on with part 2. Right, so I think without further ado, we'll get started with our first talk. So delighted to kick off with Mel Ruth Oakley from Discovery Point, who's going to be talking about Captain Scott's snow goggles. So Mel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. If you just give me a second while I load up my screen to share. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Mel Ruth Oakley, and I'm the curator for Dundee Heritage Trust. So we care for and manage both the Royal Research Ship Discovery and the Associated Museum Discovery Point, and then we have an amazing polar collection. And we also look after Verdant Works, which is the museum which tells the story of dukes in Dundee and Scotland's Duke collection. So we're really pleased to say that after being closed for COVID restrictions, the ship is now open, and Verdant Works is going to open at the end of the month on the 28th with a special exhibition on the Scottish diaspora tapestry, the stories of Scots abroad. And it's been absolutely fantastic having the museum back open, the ship back open. We're really looking forward to seeing visitors at Verdant at the end of the month. So with 2 museums and almost 10,000 objects, each with their own amazing story, picking one for today has been rather tricky. That being said, I've managed to give it a go, and I'm going to speak to you about an item from our polar collection, which is Captain Scott's goggles. Now, these are normally on display at Discovery Point. However, we took advantage of the fact that we were closed for closed for the construction work, closed for COVID, and to do some construction work. So what this is going to do is provide access to our dome area for the first time. We're really excited about this because it's going to be finished at the end of this year, and it will provide a view across the Tay and the city, which is something people haven't really got to see before. So we hope that when we are able to open that, you can come and see the goggles at the end of the year. But until then, ship is open and everybody is more than welcome to come and visit, get a feel for life on board. So why did I pick the goggles from our collection, and what is it that makes them interesting? Well, eye protection like this is an absolutely essential piece of kit when you're trekking through hostile terrain such as Antarctica. Explorers, both in the past and today, are exposed to a medical condition called snow blindness. So this is caused by the intense glare of sunlight reflecting on the snow, and this would burn either the corneas or exposed skin of those that are there. So this left, the crew with blistered faces, and they were often unable to see. And this was extremely painful and meant that eye protection is an absolute must. So different members of the crew favoured different style of goggles. You can see some at the bottom of the screen here. As well as Scots wooden goggles, you also had goggles with tinted glass, but surrounded by metal or surrounded by leather. So for Scots goggles, you can see that from the image here that they are wooden and they've got a small cross cut across each eye to provide some visibility. They also have small holes on either side so they can be tied to the face with leather straps. And we know that these belong to Captain Scott because he's carved his initials, RFS, into them at the top. And we know that Scott also preferred this type of goggle. So Captain Scott is quoted to say, "Few men preferred the ordinary wire gauze type with smoked glass, but the drawback to these was their liability to become frosted over. The alternatives were to have a piece of leather with a slit in place of the glass, or to have the goggles cut from a piece of wood. Personally, I much preferred the latter, and in the end invariably used them. Mine were carefully shaped to fit over the nose and eyes, and had considerable cross-shaped aperture, and were blackened inside and out." And you can see from the image here that they were nicely shaped, and when you see them in person, they really do. You can see how the way that they were absolutely shaped to Captain Scott's face. However, unfortunately, we know that the goggles were not fully effective, and there were many reports of the crew suffering from snow blindness. One such report is from November 1902, when the crewmen Frank Plumley and Arthur Blissett accompanied First Lieutenant Charles Lloyds on a trek to Cape Crozier and the penguin colony there. Now, whilst they were lucky and they found the thing everyone wished for, an undamaged emperor penguin egg, all the men suffered from snow blindness and each of them went blind and had to take their turns leading, temporarily blind, leading each of them one at a time back to the ship. So one person at the front for a while and then the next person at the front for a while. And so from this, we can only really imagine the difficulties that the crew experienced and, you know, the rudimentary equipment that they had 120 years ago. And it makes their achievements, what they managed to do at the time, all the greater when you consider the conditions that they worked with. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to have a really short introduction to just one of the items in our collection. Like I say, if you want to visit the ship, we are now open. And if you want to find out more about our collection, our entire catalogue is online at www.dhtcollections.com. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mel. That's great. Right, we're going to whiz straight ahead now, and we're off to Blair Castle, and Keren Guthrie is going to tell us about some Jacobite bagpipes. So, Keren, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you for asking me to be part of Tayside Treasures. So today I am going to speak to you about a set of bagpipes which are part of our new Jacobite exhibition. The exhibition's titled A Family Divided, the Athels and the Jacobite Risings. So the exhibition will reflect the trials and tribulations of the Athel family and Blair Castle during the Jacobite rebellion. And the bagpipes form an important part of that story. Here we see the set of bagpipes. So it's an early set, a two-drone set of Scottish Highland bagpipes. Originally, Highland bagpipes would have comprised of a single drone with a second drone being added in the mid to late 1500s, and the third, or the great drone that we see today, came into use in the early 1700s. Now, these particular pipes came into our collection in 1857, and this was through George VI, Duke of Athol. And he was an avid collector of Jacobite-related artefacts. And the pipes were given to the Duke by John MacGregor of Drumharry. And John's father had actually been piper to the fourth Duke of Athol. So the pipes had been in the MacGregor family since before the Jacobite risings. And Highland bagpipes were were seen as a musical instrument of war, really. They replaced trumpets as a way of inspiring Highlanders into battle and of course, putting the fear into their enemies. So it said that the shrill and penetrating sound of bagpipes could be heard up to 10 miles away above the roar of the battle. So during the Battle of Culloden in 1746, these particular pipes, according to MacGregor family legend, were played by John McCann MacGregor of Fortingall, and he was grandfather to John of Drumharry, who gave the pipes to the 6th Duke of Atholl in exchange for a grant of a pension. Here we see there's a silver sleeve on the chanter, and it's actually inscribed in Gaelic and English. And it says, "These pipes belong to John MacGregor, piper to the Duke of Atholl, played in the battles of Prince Charles Stuart's army in 1745 to 1746. So the pipes have had some conservation work done on them, and obviously the bag inside has been replaced. Now, also included in our exhibition are the following 2 items. So this particular painting of the lovely Lady Nairn, or Lady Lude, with her pet dog and her bow and arrow, was painted by David Allen. Her family belonged to the neighbouring estate of Lude, which was owned by the Robertson clan, and they were staunch Jacobites. Bonnie Prince Charlie visited Blair Castle as he travelled across Scotland gathering his Jacobite army, and he was hosted at the castle by Lady Lude, and there was dancing and they played bowls on the front lawn, and none of this impressed Thomas Bissett. He was commissary to the 2nd Duke of Atholl, and he writes to the Duke in a letter dated September 1745, and he says, "Lady Lude is here with them, and she behaves like a light giglet, and hath taken upon her to be the sole mistress of the house." So we can see Thomas and the 2nd Duke of Atholl were not supporters of the Jacobite cause. And the Jacobites' risings, they caused a split in the Atholl family that lasted 60 years, pitting father against son and brother against brother. So secondly, I'd like to show you this beautiful pocket sight compass, and it is still in working order. The compass is dated 1745, which you can just see on the screen where it's opened, the picture it's opened up. It's said to have been used by Bonnie Prince Charlie during his escape to the Outer Hebrides after the Battle of Culloden. So our exhibition covers from the Battle of Killiecrankie in 1689 and Bonnie Dundee's death to the final Battle of Culloden, and we see how a family were politically and physically divided for over 60 years. Artefacts, plans, documents and paintings are at the heart of our story of the Jacobite exhibition, and hopefully these 3 items will have given you just a wee taster of what we have here at the castle. If you've got any questions or inquiries, please feel free to email me on the email on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keren. Right, we're coming up to slightly more recent times, and we're off to the Blackwatch Castle Museum, and Fiona Connah is going to tell us about a helmet with a really interesting story to tell. So Fiona, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. As Matthew said, my name is Fiona Connah, and I am the museum assistant here at the Blackwatch Castle Museum. And we're now fully reopened, and it's really lovely to see visitors again. So I don't think it will come as a surprise that most of the collection we have here at the Blackwatch Castle Museum is of a military nature. And I must admit, like Mel, I found it quite daunting to try and decide which object in a collection that I should speak about. because there's just so many special items and so many stories. And I'll be talking about a relatively recent acquisition, and it's one that really captured the attention of everybody here when it was donated. So I know we were supposed to speak about one item from our collection, but I will be talking about two, a First World War steel helmet and an Edward VII halfpenny. And they are both, of course, relatively commonplace items in military collections and other museums, but they have a rather special story which binds them together forever. So we were very excited when these items came into the museum in 2017. Not only did they have an amazing story, but they were also part of a larger collection of items, which included medals and maps and photographs and equipment. And so good was this collection, we had an almost ready-made exhibition in our hands. So that was excellent. And this collection relates to the man you see on the screen, Captain Smith Cameron. And he served with the Blackwatch during the First World War. And he's originally from Angus, and he was working for the Clydesdale Bank when he joined the regiment at the outbreak of the war. And he was actually their first employee to see active service. He was just 17 years old. So that middle photograph is him right at the beginning when he first starts serving. And during his service in the war, he rises from the rank of private all the way to captain. So the museum had been contacted by his grandchildren who were keen that this collection should be preserved rather than split up between all the generations. And at the heart of the collection were the steel helmet and the halfpenny, which together saved the life of Captain Cameron when he was hit by a sniper's bullet in 1917. So I'm just going to describe a little bit about the events of this. So the 31st of July, 1917, was a day of intense fighting for all of those involved. Conditions are horrific. There have been days of rain, and it's turned the landscape into a sea of mud. And the 4th, 5th Battalion, with whom Cameron was serving, were to suffer 170 casualties that day, and 197 Blackwatch soldiers lost their lives. And it's in this context that Cameron had his lucky escape. So this first picture, this is the helmet. See at the top, a large that was caused by the impact of the sniper's bullet. And First World War helmets were designed to protect the wearer from falling shrapnel, but were unlikely to withstand a direct bullet. But Smith Cameron had taken his halfpenny and he'd stuck it to the inside of his helmet. And luck should have it that the bullet hit the helmet exactly at this point and caused it to ricochet around the side of the helmet, ending up wounding his shoulder. If you see my cursor, you can see the bulge in the picture there of where it ricochets round. And this next picture, I've tried to draw in it the trajectory of the bullet as it goes around the side of the helmet. So it goes into his shoulder and wounded him, but saved his life. And this last slide here, this is the penny itself. And you can really see how warped the coin is due to the impact of the bullet. And it's really quite amazing the detail you can see still of the coin, despite the fact that it's really quite scrunched up now. So as I said before, the collection was an almost ready exhibition and was ideal for our son's case, which is where we have temporary exhibitions exploring the stories of Blackwatch soldiers. And the family had done quite a lot of work for us already. They'd done loads of research into some of the background, but we continued on with that. And we discovered that Captain Cameron was even luckier than we realized. And he'd survived a previous head injury in 1915. So other than the time he spent recuperating from these two injuries, Cameron saw active service from November 1914 right through to the end of the war. And in fact, you might have noticed in my first slide that one of the images was an older man. And like many men who served during the Great War, Cameron would go on to become a member of both the Civil Defence and the Home Guard in Lanark. Oh. What was particularly special about developing this exhibition was that two of his grandchildren were able to make the trip up to Perth to see their grandfather's story on display in the museum. And they were very proud of their grandfather, as we are to have these in the collection. So if you'd like to see this display, it will be here for the next month or so, but we will be moving on to our next one. But we'd be delighted if you'd like to come and visit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona. What a fascinating story. Wow. Okay, we're coming back to Dundee now, and from helmets to fish. And David Lampard from the McManus, Dundee's Art Gallery Museum, is going to tell us about a sparling. David, over to you.
Hey. Okay, so I'm going to talk about an object that is currently in one of our temporary exhibitions called Time and Tide, the transformation of the Tay, open until 3rd of October 2021, so this year, which is all about changes in the waterfront that we've had probably from the sort of 16th, 17th century up to the present day. And this is my magnificent sparling called the Smelt. So sparling are a small fish, about 30 centimetre long. They're unusual that the adults live in coastal waters and in estuaries in Western Europe as far south as Spain, but they migrate upstream to fresh water to breed. So they're one of the few fish that can tolerate a whole range of salinity. They were so numerous in the Tay that there were commercial fisheries for them, and it said that during the spawning run, the water surface boiled with the number of fish going past. However, they've declined, and in the Tay, the last fishery we know of was in the early 20th century and ran by the Tay Fisheries Company, which is the organisation that currently runs Willowgate near Friarton. In Scotland, they used to be recorded in 15 rivers, but now they're restricted to only 3, the Cree on the Solway, the Firth of Forth and the Tay. And because they're so rare, they're actually protected under something called the UK Biodiversity Action Plan, and they're a priority species. So our particular sparling was caught during a survey of fish that were caught on filters for the cooling water intake pipes of Carolina Port Power Station in Dundee in 1979. So members of staff at the museum and the Hydro Board collected 22 species and 500 individuals fish off the filters. And the survey gave us a glimpse or a snapshot of some of the fish found in the Tay at this time. So there were 2 power stations at Carolina Port. The first one, which is this one, was coal-powered and opened in 1908. It converted to oil in 1971 and closed in 77. This is B, which was oil-powered and opened in 65 and closed in 82. And this is an etching by the power stations in about the 1960s, and that too is on display in the exhibition. And a final plug for our other temporary exhibition, which is actually on until March 2022, which is photographs by Joseph Mackenzie called A Love Letter to Dundee. And that's me.
Thank you very much, David. You whizzed through that really quick.
I did, yes.
Brilliant. Right, well, we're now moving on to one of our larger objects today, and we're going to the Dundee Museum of Transport. And Alexander Gujar is going to tell us about an early electric car. Alexander, over to you.
Thanks very much. So hi, I'm Alexander, manager of Dundee Museum of Transport. And our museum obviously is full of buses, bikes, trams, cars, motorcycles. And we try and make it so that visitors can sit inside, they can get pictures inside, and that it's interactive, which is obviously quite difficult right now. We opened on the 26th of April, and we also opened our Toys and Models exhibition as well. And we have a new cafe, a new board games cafe with 100+ board games. So you're very welcome to come on down. We've also got a brand new shop, lots of fun toys and games and model cars. And we opened our Future of Transport exhibition in October. And it's all about electric cars, future transport, future technology. And the gem of our collection is the 1967 Scottish Aviation Scamp, which you can see there. And in 1967, believe it or not, Scotland was a world leader in electric vehicle usage. And it's hard to imagine anyone using electric cars at that time. And indeed, the vast majority of electric cars were milk floats. And we have one of only 12 of these prototypes that were made by Scottish Aviation. So it's an aircraft manufacturing air show. And already that should be ringing alarm bells. And they didn't really have the expertise to make a project like that viable. And apparently they were inspired by the Mini and the success of the Mini. And they were inspired by the battery-powered baggage trucks at the airport as well. So it took 8 hours for a full charge of the vehicle. The max speed was a measly 36 miles an hour. And on a full charge, it could only go for 18 miles. So if you were to drive it, the 482 miles from Dundee to London, it would take 27 days. And you would have to charge it a total of 208 hours to do that. But you wouldn't even make it that far without it breaking down. It failed every single safety test. The boot fell off the back, the door fell off. And when the funders saw the safety test, they pulled out. So only 12 of these were made. And from a range, it shows how far electric vehicles have come in 50 years, from a range of 18 miles and an 8-hour charge to today, a range of 250 miles, and it takes 5 minutes to charge. It's a complete revolution. And Dundee Museum of Transport is showcasing the Scamp in a future transport exhibition at COP26 from June until November during the conference itself. And there'll be 8 other museums exhibiting or trying to sort of rethink the museum in the environmental age. So we're trying to rethink the transport museum. So the Scamp will feature here. And electric cars, well, they're not the future, at least not for Dundee. They're the present. Dundee's got the highest number of electric vehicle charging points in the UK. It's got a fleet of electric taxis. If you call teletaxis, you can actually request an electric car. The council vehicles are electric. The Ride on Bike scheme is electric. The first intercity bus service launched, which is Ember. And I got this on Saturday. So I got an electric taxi to my electric bus and then paid $7.50 to go from Dundee to Edinburgh, fully electric, 5G, very comfortable ride. And it's 7 days a week as well. So thanks very much, and maybe come and check out our future transport exhibition. We're open now. Have a cup of tea in our Board Games Cafe, and maybe see you at COP26 as well, Glasgow Science Centre.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alexander. It's great that you're going to be showing at COP26. That's a real accolade. Okay, right. We're now heading over to the other side of the Tay, to Abernethy. And Angus Mcintyre is going to tell us about their Tutti Horn. Angus, over to you.
Hello, my name is Angus Mcintyre, and I'm one of the volunteers at the Museum of Abernethy. We're hoping to open on June the 5th. Abernethy sits on a fertile plain close to where the River Erne enters the Tay, and agriculture and fishing have always been of major importance in the area. The Romans, who knew a thing or two about exploiting the local resources, had a major fortress at nearby Carpoux. And later on, Terentian monks from northern France, Tyrrhensian monks, should I say, from northern France brought fruit trees and aquavitae to the area, both of which are still much in evidence. And royalty stopped here as well. Kings and queens on their way north to be crowned at Scone would stop at Abernethy, deplete the local produce, and then move on. It's not clear whether the royal purse was ever opened to compensate the locals. I suspect it wasn't. Crops of all sorts grow around here very well, and livestock thrives too, including cattle. Most cows nowadays don't have horns. And this came about, I think, because it was found it was relatively easy to breed horns out of a herd. And this allowed more animals to be overwintered indoors with less chance of injuring each other. And it was also safer for farmhands too. But the item I have today is the Tutti Horn. Can you see that?
Yeah, just if you just hold it up a bit higher.
Right, okay.
Perfect.
Okay. This is the Tutti Horn, which dates from the days when cows were horned, in fact. From medieval times on, many households had a cow of their own. And in Abernethy, the tradition arose whereby a cowherd would collect the cows in the morning, take them up into the Ochil Hills behind Abernethy for the day to one of the common grazings known as a commonty. He would spend all day there with them and only bring them down for milking in the evening. Now, to call them in the first place, he would toot the Tutti Horn, and he would do this at outside a building called, yes, the Tutti House. There is still a Tutti House there in the main street, the old main street in Abernethy, at a spot known as, yes, Tutti Corner. The logic is impeccable, I feel. Anyway, the object itself is 30 centimetres long, and despite being hollowed out, obviously, it still weighs half a kilo. The pointed end, the tip of it has been sawn off so it can be blown. And there is evidence of a fair amount of wear on that end. I don't think you can see that, which I can only put down to centuries of use and abrasion by the teeth of cowherds. Given its age, there's not a lot of graffiti on it. And I find this quite surprising because when you think of long days up the hill with only cows, with only animals not known for their sparkling conversation, I feel there should be more, but there isn't. Maybe they didn't take the horn up with them, I don't know. There is one item, however, of graffiti, which, I don't know if you can see that. Yes, there we go. It is the letters TP and what I take to be the date 1744. Now TP, whoever he was, let's call him Tam Payton because that would be a typical name in these parts. He scratched this little message here the year before the Jacobite rebellion of 1745. Now Tam may well have witnessed he will have witnessed some comings and goings. He may even have witnessed some exciting events. We don't know. What is known is that Bonnie Prince Charlie himself visited Mugdrum House 2 miles away to consult his main military commander, Lord George Murray. It's intriguing to think that perhaps our Tam joined the campaign at some point. If he did, no doubt he would have found it rather more exciting than his day job. Tradition has it, however, that this item is much older than 1744, but we don't know. Without carbon dating, we cannot tell. So that's it. Abernethy's Tutti Horn. Some practice required, possibly. Thank you.
Brilliant. See, we weren't sure whether you were going to toot or not, and you really tooted there. That was fantastic. Brilliant. Right. Okay, we're heading over to Arbroath next, and Scott Byrne is at Hospital Field, and I think this is probably the most recent object that we're going to be talking about, which is a drawing made during a fairly recent performance event by the artist Alistair Mclennan. So, Scott, over to you.
Perfect. Great. Yeah, Hospital Field. It's a great place to get to know. So yeah, we're opening on the 27th of May. We've had a really busy time at Hospital Field, still busy because we're preparing for the opening of the walled gardens and newly restored fernery and cafe. So it's big. The first phase of our new capital development is just kicking off from 27th of May, so I encourage you to come and see us. But this work here, as Matthew described, fairly recent, 2015. And for this event, Hospital Field, we've selected a work that's really untypical within the collections of this historic house in Arbroath here. So this is, it's actually a picture, it's a fairly dated picture as well from about the same time, 2015. But not a lot has changed to the facade anyway. It's a complex place. It's a fascinating medieval history and unique 19th century story, bequeathed by Patrick and Elizabeth Allen Fraser in trust in 1890. The collections are typically eclectic for a Victorian collection, with the core of it being 19th century paintings that were assembled by Patrick and Elizabeth Allen Fraser. This is a scene from the picture gallery, and looks almost precisely like that today. And it was assembled by Patrick and Elizabeth Allen Fraser to inspire students of art at Scotland's first residential art school. We accepted the first students as undergraduates in 1902. The purpose-built artist studios, this is the rear of them here, have been in constant use since this period. So quite unusual to have purpose-built artist studios of this age. The first one was built in around about 1850 and the second ones were built in 1901. They have served the needs of the undergraduate program at Hospital Field until, this is Tamara Henderson, a Canadian artist who is demonstrating how well the studios can be used by artists with all media. And this is Mary Redmond preparing some work in the Patrick Allen Fraser studio with the great big fire. So you can see some of the architecture there of the interiors of the 1850 artist studio. So yeah, they've served the needs of an undergraduate program until 1937, when the trust was developed as a postgraduate program in partnership with Scotland's four other art schools in Dundee, Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Glasgow. Alistair Mclennan was born in 1943 in Blair. His work looks into political and social and aesthetic questions, and he is regarded as one of Britain's most highly respected practitioners of live art or performance art. He graduated from Dunder and then went on to have a huge influence through his art, but also through his teaching roles in Glasgow and Belfast, where he's lived since 1975. Mclennan came to Hospital Field in 1965, the year after his graduation from Duncan and Jordanston, and before he left for further postgraduate study in Chicago. In this great looking picture that we've only recently received kindly from Will McLean for our interest, it's taken in the studios at Hospital Field. We can see Alistair Mclennan on the far left. Will McLean is the bearded chap fourth from the right, and the other students there was 9 other students all collected together from the other art schools. But really interesting picture. We've got lots of pictures like this, and from the past 100 years as an art school. During this time, Mclennan was occupied exclusively as a painter. We were gifted this work through the Scottish Arts Council bequest, later Creative Scotland, and it's called Painting. It was made in 1975, so 10 years after Mclennan was at Hospital Field, and the same year that he went to live in Belfast. It becomes clear when studying the artist careers of the who studied at Hospital Field that quite a lot of them the alumni went on to establish careers as influential teachers at other institutions. And this observation became the starting point for an exhibition that we called Continuum in 2015. The exhibition featured a painting by former Hospital Field warden James Cowie, that we borrowed from Tate. You can see it on the far wall in this picture. And it also featured works by Vicky Morton, who made the sculpture in the foreground, and Michael Fullerton and Andrew Patterson. It also featured a performance by Alistair Mclennan, from which the piece I'm speaking about is a remnant. In Continuum, Mclennan was invited back to Hospital Field to produce a new work 50 years after he'd been a student in that summer of 1965. There's Alistair Mclennan right in the centre of this image, just in advance of the performance starting. It took place on I was there, it was a crisp, clear, freezing cold day. 21st of November 2015. You can see the sea here as well, hospital fields in a lofty position just on the coast. So it was really cold, but perfectly windless. At the beginning of the performance, which was entitled Birth on Earth, Mclennan encouraged the assembled crowd to consider the phrase same difference. The collection of objects, including a folded easel, paper, pens, ink, and a photograph from 1965, were articulated alongside other elements such as black shoes tied together with their laces and a bucket of water holding a dead salmon. You can see the documentation images here. The marks made in pen and ink were made horizontally on 2 pages that Mclennan passed between, or 2 tables, I mean to say, left to dry and served as a remnant of the work. It may be considered that this was a kind of ceremonial departure from painting through the performance. I'll just finish with a quote from Mclennan made at the time, which I think is interesting. So, reflecting on his time at Hospital Field as a young postgraduate, Mclennan commented that it was such an enabling context, I'll never forget it. I was doing academic painting, and I suppose people might think performance is so different from that, but I see the creativity of it more like water. It can be ice, it can be steam, it can be liquid, but its essence remains the same. And he expresses a concern that if he had any concerns was that if some of the people that he was studying with would be horrified at what he's doing now because it looks so different, but he just sees it as something that naturally evolved from one physical state to another. Joyfully, Dunkley Jordanstone has been made custodians of the astonishing archive of the artist. So the archive has been publicly available as a brilliant website. And I hope I have not gone over my time.
Thank you very much. Great. Yes, we're kind of wrestling with what to do with this enormous collection from Alistair Mclennan at the moment. That was fantastic. Right, well, we have one more talk in this first half. So we're over to Inner Peffrey Library, which is both a library and a museum. And Lara Haggerty is going to tell us about the very first borrower's register. So Lara, over to you.
Good afternoon, my name's Lara Haggerty and I am Keeper of Books here at the Library of Inner Peffrey. And today I'm going to share with you some of our books and borrower mysteries. Inner Peffrey is Scotland's very first free public lending library, and we are in a very rural location in the heart of southwest Perthshire and near the market town of Crieff. And Inner Peffrey also has one of the oldest complete records of any lending library in the UK in our borrower's register. And I'm going to share with you some of the stranger items that we find in the register. Whilst we don't have very much in the way of Agatha Christie books at Inner Peffrey, we do have library detective stories. Now the register is there, of course, to say which book has been borrowed. If that is, you can work it out. In the days before barcodes on books or even library cards, the borrower or the keeper would write the name of the book in the register, or sometimes just a description of it. For example, on the 4th of January, 1755, John Thompson of Crieff borrowed a big Bible. On the 11th of June, 1757, John McLeish, who was Minister of the Gospel, borrowed a quarto Bible. And on the 2nd of November 1751, James Sharp borrowed a big Bible with cuts. Now, Inner Peffrey has over 50 Bibles in the collection. I'm very pleased to say that none of them have slashed pages. And a Bible with cuts is one like this, with woodcut illustrations. And big Bibles probably refers to the kind of Bible you might see on a church lectern, known as a folio, a very heavy book. A quarto Bible would be half the size of a folio, something like a large hardback novel would be today, so it would be much easier to carry home. I'm also quite pleased, though, that James Sharp borrowed one with pictures in it, as it's quite a hefty tome, even if it's in a quarto. My favourite book description was of one borrowed by Janet Cooper in 1752. The register says it is a small book on the unchangeableness of God. Now, this seemed like such an interesting description that I sought it out one day and climbed up on the ladder to quite a high shelf to discover that the real mystery was why the keeper used the subtitle of the book to describe it in the register. Maybe they couldn't read the fact that it was actually called A Beam of Divine Glory, which is a rather more descriptive title than a small book on the unchangeableness of God. But that is the subtitle, opened, vindicated and improved. And this book, which was printed in 1678, was actually signed by our founder. So it was one of the earliest books that we have here at Innerpeffray from the original collection. And then there are the borrowers. More mysteries. The register records the name, address, and sometimes the occupation of the borrower. One of my favourite occupations is this one, river watcher. It sounds like a very restful kind of job, but as it involved watching for poachers, it probably wasn't. Daniel Comrie, who borrowed between 1893 and 4, describes himself as a post runner, which doesn't sound at all restful. A post runner was somebody who delivered the post on foot, usually between 2 locations. And Comrie delivered between Crieff and Innerpeffray. We know that Daniel Comrie started as an apprentice tailor. He went on to be a combined rural postman and tailor. So perhaps the post runner job was to supplement his income as a tailor, or maybe he just liked being outdoors. Now, Edward Pickard describes himself as a van man, which of course means that we tend to think of him as one of those delivery removal chaps with distance no object, no job too small in his advert in the local paper. But van here is actually short for caravan and was used to describe a horse-drawn carriage, like the one we can see in this 1904 picture of Crieff's High Street, just 5 years after Pickard was borrowing at Innerpeffray. Pickard lived at Ernbank Road, right in the middle of Crieff, and he was a flour miller, a meal miller and a baker. So he was likely delivering his wares across the strath in his van. And I'm going to leave you with another occupational conundrum. James Brewster, caper. Now, Brewster borrowed books at Innerpeffray between March 1764 and October 1783. I assumed, of course, that a caper was somebody who made capes, like this rather dapper gentleman here. And the textile industry in this part of Scotland was an important part of the local economy. A caper, though, is not somebody who makes capes. Thanks to Gillian, one of our volunteer team, she discovered that it's actually somebody who makes caps. And in the 18th century, caps for gentlemen were generally of 2 kinds. We had rough linen caps, which were work caps, and indoor caps, which were made of a finer linen and were usually worn by gentlemen when they removed their wigs, either to cover their hair or to keep their head warm because they'd shaved it to wear the wig. And so we can see these 2 types here in John Kay's portraits of 2 very different characters, the painter de la Tour and Mortar Willie, aged 107. That's our library detective stories for today. Thank you very much indeed.
Great, thank you, Lara. Right, okay, so we'll now have a break, and I think we probably had to have a slightly shorter break than we'd planned just to catch up. So if you'd like to come back at 4:05, and Mel will be taking over chairing the second half. So enjoy your rest, folks, and we'll see you again at 4:05.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all our speakers in our first half. I hope everybody's back from their break and ready to go. So our next speaker today is from the HMS Unicorn, Finlay, and he's going to speak to us today about a model of Dundee docks from HMS Unicorn. Finlay, if you want to go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Mel. I'll just share my screen. So yes, thank you for having me along today, and to all of our fellow speakers who've shown us some wonderful pieces from their collections. As Mel said, my name is Finlay Raffle, and I'm the Volunteering, Engagement and Learning Officer at HMS Unicorn. Unicorn is currently open at the weekends at the moment, and we're aiming to be open daily from the start of June. So today I'm going to be giving you a very quick look at one of our favourite models from Unicorn's collection, and it's a model of Dundee docks, which was created at the end of the Second World War. One of the reasons that we wanted to speak about this model today is because it's currently going under conservation work. The work means that it can be properly and safely displayed to visitors during this summer, which we're excited to have happen. With Unicorn having been a feature of Dundee's docks since she arrived in the city in November of 1873, the ship has seen a lot of changes take place along the waterfront of her adopted home. The model's not only a beautiful handcrafted piece in the collection, but it's a connection for the ship of how much has changed in the docks over the past 75 years. Measuring over 2 meters in length, the model dates from 1945, and it's signed by the maker David Law. Now, David Law was not a professional model maker, but rather a carpenter at the Dundee Harbour Trust. He lived on Woodside Terrace, just back from the Cleppington Road in Dundee, and he actually died the following year in 1946. We're unsure if he built other models of the docks or of other ships during his lifetime, but this would have certainly been one of the final ones that David made. The model is mainly wooden, but many of the buildings and the features are made with metal, including lead, which is one of the interesting things for the conservators to have a go at stabilising. So I just thought I'd show you a few small close-ups of the model and with the photographic comparisons, because it rather sweetly captures many of the aspects of Dundee's waterfront from that period that have been significantly changed or even in some cases lost. So in this example, the model shows Unicorn when she was berthed in the Earl Grey dock, and you can see Unicorn's old jury masts on the model are broken and currently being fixed. And you can also see the old swimming baths in Dundee on the right-hand side, the little orange building there. The middle section of the model shows Dundee's port and shipyards around the Stannergate and the King George V Wharf Road. Many of the buildings and sheds of the Caledon Yard can be seen, and the cranes that used to line the river are currently being reattached to the model. The model goes as far downriver as the fish dock, so just past the Eastern Wharf. And you'll see in the images there, the one small building alongside the fish dock is noted as being the fish depot. Possibly David thought maybe not everyone would recognise that when he made the model. And at the other end of the model, you're able to see Craig Pier, which formed one of the walls of the ferry harbour and was where the Tay ferries were based. From the photograph, you'll also see the condition of the metal buildings as they've corroded over time on the model. So although the model's been with us since the 1980s, in recent years, it's been in a rather poor state, and we've been unable to display it to the public. The wooden elements have become stained and soiled in places, and the metal pieces were beginning to corrode. But thankfully, through conservation, it's underway, and it's restoring it to its former glory. So with funding from the Association of Independent Museums, the Pilgrim Trust, and the R.J. Larg Family Trust, we've been able to send the model down to Hopetoun House in South Queensferry. Conservation work started earlier in the year, and by the start of next month, the model will be back on display on Unicorn with a new display stand so people can view it properly. And we're going to be displaying it alongside large photographs from the 1940s and the 1950s so people can see views of the docks alongside. So I'd just like to finish by saying thank you very much for listening to me today and letting me take part in the Tayside Museums event. And we hope that you'll be able to come down to Unicorn and see the model in person at some point over the summer. If anyone does have any questions, my email is just at the bottom of the screen there, so please feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Finlay. That's an absolutely fantastic model that you have there. So next we have Paula Blair from Perth and Kinross, Culture Perth and Kinross, with a glass plate negative. Paul, if you want to take it away.
Hello, thanks Mel. I'll just share the screen here. So yes, I'm one of the collections team based at Perth Museum and Art Gallery, Culture Perth and Kinross, and have particular responsibility for the photographic collections there. And Perth Museum and Art Gallery is open now Thursdays through to Monday. Anyway, my chosen object for today is this photographic negative taken by Perth photographer Magnus Jackson in about 1880. It shows a lily and other potted plants in a hothouse at Freeland House in Forgandenny. The reason I chose this subject is because I think it perfectly illustrates the value of the photograph as a physical object in its own right. Apart from the satisfaction of holding a real tangible object in your hand, and this glass plate negative is a substantial 25 by 32 centimetres by 3 millimetres thick, there's a lot of information that can be had from the physical surface. This photograph is made by the wet collodion process, and Magnus would have prepared the plate from scratch, coating the glass with the light sensitive chemicals in a mobile darkroom or tent. Seeing the actual glass plate and the little imperfections in the surface only adds to the connection with the creative process and craft that went into making this image. You can even see the corner up in the top left there where Magnus held the plate while he was developing it. In these days of digital imaging, it's not surprising if we sometimes think of photographs being nothing more than images somehow created from a series of numbers on a computer. However, since the birth of photography some 180 years ago, there have been many different kinds of photographic processes, all of which had their own particular characteristics. These features are useful for dating the photographs and can be quite evocative of their time, but more than that, they add to the richness of our photographic heritage and speak volumes about the technology and the tastes of the time. The early development of photography saw two very different photographic processes rivaling one another for dominance. The first, shown here, is Louis Daguerre's Daguerreotype. This little jewel of an image was created on a sheet of polished silver. It had to be held at the right angle to the light to avoid reflections and became known as the mirror with a memory. This example is a stereoscopic image built into its own 3D viewer. This one was produced in the United States, but the subject is the wife of a well-known Perth citizen, Andrew Coates. The other process of the 1840s was the calotype, a name coined by Henry Fox Talbot to describe his paper-based negative to positive process. This allowed for almost unlimited prints to be made from one paper negative. Next to the daguerreotype, it really couldn't be more different. The chemicals making the image were absorbed deep into the fibres of the paper, giving the images a soft-edged appearance. This image is made by the famous pioneering duo David Octavius Hill from Perth and Robert Adamson. The next big development in photographic processes was with the advent of the wet collodion process, an example of which I chose as my favourite object. Once prepared, the plates had to be exposed in the camera within 10 or 15 minutes. If they dried out, all sensitivity was lost. Too far there. This picture shows Lodi Rach slate quarry in about 1880. You can see three figures near to the horse pulling a wagon, and another figure further to the right. But what if we go closer in? Suddenly, we realise that there are 7 other workmen in the photograph as well. The wet plate process popularised portraiture in a big way, and the little carte de visite, a photograph attached to a decorative card bearing the studio's name, became all the rage. But what about colour, I hear you say? Well, around the turn of the century, the answer was usually to apply colour with a brush, as in this photograph by George Washington Wilson, of Calendar railway station. Real colour photographs were possible from about 1903 using the process invented by the French Lumiere brothers. Finally, I suggested that some images were highly redolent of a particular era, and for me, this 6:9 colour transparency with its warmth and rich ochre just makes me think of the 1950s.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was really quite fascinating to think about the photograph as an actual physical thing, especially in the digital age. But next up, we have Matthew Jaron from the University of Dundee Museum Collections with a page of Judge Dredd comics art by Colin McNeill. So I'll let you take that away, Matthew.
Okay, thank you very much. So one of the most significant parts of the University Museum Collections is our art and design collection, which has been steadily growing ever since we first opened in 1883. And one of the unique things that we collect is original comics art. And we actually have Scotland's only public collection of comics art. And indeed, it's one of only 3 that I know of anywhere in the UK. Now, thanks to D.C. Thomson, Dundee, of course, became world famous in the 20th century as one of the leading centres of comics production, and numerous graduates from the city's art college, now Duncan of Jordanson College of Art and Design, ended up working as illustrators for the company. They included Sam Thayer, who became famous during World War II for his propaganda strip in the Dandy, Addie and Hermie, the Nasty Nazis, Bob McGrath, who drew the 3 Bears in the Beano, Jimmy Glenn of Lord Snooty fame, and Jim Petrie, who drew Minnie the Minx in the Beano for 40 years. And you may not be aware that perhaps the most famous of all D.C. Thomson artists, Dudley D. Watkins, actually taught illustration at the Art College in the late 1930s. Well, Colin McNeill came to the Art College to study illustration in the late 1980s, graduating in 1989. Now, at that time, comics were clearly looked down upon as a lesser art, and by all accounts, his tutors were less than pleased with him spending all his time drawing them. But he quickly found success and actually won his first professional commission while he was only in his first term at the college. His early work included creating covers for the final years of D.C. Thomson's science fiction anthology Starblazer, including the very last issue in 1991. But by that time, he was already well established with the title that had transformed the landscape of British comics, 2000 AD, published by IPC in London. He began working for them in 1987 and had his first Judge Dredd work published 2 years later. He's since gone on to illustrate numerous stories for Dredd and other 2000 AD characters, as well as working for big American companies, including DC and Marvel. So altogether, we have 30 pieces by Colin in our collection, the earliest being a set of strontium dog pages from 1988. Most are in black and white, but we also have examples of his colour work as well. Particularly interesting are some of his original pencil roughs, showing how he builds up his complex spatial arrangements of the panels. The piece I've chosen to focus on is from 2011, and it's for a Judge Dredd story called The Further Dastardly Deeds of P.J. Maybe. And it encapsulates many of the things that make original comics art so appealing. He uses an incredibly bold graphic style with black backgrounds, rough edges, different angles within the panels to give a sense of movement, panels overlapping others to give a sense of depth, and of course this amazing foom in the central panel in which the lettering becomes the shape of the object. Now, normally on comics, the lettering is done separately. For many years, the speech bubbles would be pasted directly onto the boards, as you can see here. In the 1990s, it became more common to use separate sheets of acetate. So, for example, here's the artwork, here's the acetate, and then here's the two together. By the time that this piece was done in 2011, lettering would be added digitally, and you can see the final published version here. But McNeill clearly wanted to design this sound effect himself to integrate it integrally into the art. Now, there are various other experiences that you can get from looking at the real artwork, which don't really translate when I just show you this image on the screen here. One of them is the size. Comics art was almost always produced at 2 or 3 times the size of the final published version. So there's a lot more detail apparent in the original. In this case, the artwork is 40 by 52 centimeters, while the published page is just half that. And the other thing that the original art can reveal is all the changes that the artist made during the process. Again, you can't really see this here, but there are various bits where you can either detect his original pencils under the ink, or that have white paint or Tipp-Ex where he's corrected parts. This is actually more noticeable in another page that we have from the same story, where the whole of Dredd's chin has been painted out, presumably to make it even larger than originally intended. He's really going for the full Desperate Dan look here. And the last thing to mention is what McNeill is drawing on. The earliest work that we have by him is on really high quality rigid drawing boards, and as we go through his later work, the boards gradually get slimmer until by this time he's using really thin white paper. Now this is partly because the artwork can now be digitally scanned much more easily, but I suspect it's also a cost-saving exercise, because even for an artist of McNeill's talents, comics probably don't pay as well as they once did. Anyway, I wanted to end by saying that the university now teaches comic studies within both the School of Humanities and the Art College, and I always enjoy getting the chance to show off the collection to the students. Fairly recently, we commissioned some of the postgraduate students to create their own comic inspired by the experience of our collections. And as you can see, this piece by Eve Greenwood incorporates that wonderful foom to great effect. And that's all I have time for. So thank you very much.
Absolutely fascinating, Matthew. Really interesting to see that. So next we have Ruth Brown from the Dunkeld Community Archive and Chapter House with a notebook belonging to a Great War padre.
Hi, my name is Ruth Brown and I manage the Dunkeld Community Archive and Chapter House Museum. We hold a vast collection of local research, records, photographs and memorabilia, amongst which is the Regimental Administrative Archive of the Scottish Horse, which was raised in 1900 during the Boer War. Their administrative headquarters were based in Dunkeld, and their commander was the Duke of Atholl. The object I've chosen to talk about today is a small army notebook, which belonged to the Reverend Robert Wilfred Callan. During the First World War, he served with bravery and distinction in the Army Chaplains Department with the Northumberland Fusiliers and the Blackwatch. In September 1916, the 1st and 2nd and part of the 3rd Regiments of the Scottish Horse combined to form an infantry affiliated to the Blackwatch. They were called the 13th Scottish Horse Battalion of the Royal Highlanders. On the 1st of October 1918, the battalion went into line at Vaudreuil in France. This notebook records the men from the 13th Battalion who were killed during the months of October and November 1918. Each day, the Reverend Callan lists the men's names, regimental numbers, and the trench map coordinates of where they were buried. On the 14th of October 1919, an unknown 2nd Lieutenant of the Scottish Horse was exhumed from his temporary war grave and reburied in Prospect Hill British Cemetery in France by the 83rd Labour Corps. Documentation from that time records his final resting place as Plot 3, Row D, grave number 5. His regiment and rank was identified by his uniform, but his name had been lost in the horrors of war. So, how does an unknown grave come to be identified, and how can we contribute to that? It starts off with someone thinking they can prove who is buried in an unknown grave. It is possible to prove this through research only, as exhumation of bodies are never used for identification purposes. The inquirer sends their research to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who check it against their own records, verify it, and if the case has merit, they forward it to the Service Historical Branch. And this is for the Army, Navy and Air Force. The Service Historical Branch undertakes their own research and assessment of evidence, looking at documentation in historical collections and military and civilian records. The Service Historical Branch then writes up their recommendation and forwards it to the Joint Casualty and Compassionate Centre Commemorations Team, who are known as the MOD War Detectives. JCCC is the adjudicating authority. They will pull all the evidence together, review it, and decide whether to accept or decline the recommendation. If accepted, they will trace family and organise a service of rededication at the grave where the CWGC will have installed a new headstone bearing the casualty's name. In 2019, we were approached by the War Graves Adjudication Unit, who asked if we had any information about a 2nd Lieutenant David Bell, who was killed in action on the 7th of October 1918. Coincidentally, we had recently looked at the chaplain's notebook and had discovered that all but one soldier out of the 93 listed had a marked grave recorded on the Commonwealth War Graves website. Listed on the 7th of October 1918, along with 2 other soldiers buried at trench map coordinates T26A92 at Montbrehat, was 2nd Lieutenant David Bell. We immediately responded to the War Graves adjudicator, sending them a copy of the notebook. Sometime later, we received an email from the adjudicator confirming that, after much research, including the use of our chaplain's notebook, they had formally identified 2nd Lieutenant David Bell's grave. So after nearly 103 years, David would finally get his name on his gravestone. The case was approved by the Joint Casualty and Compassionate Centre, and the rededication service was planned, but has been postponed due to the COVID pandemic. I personally feel quite emotional about being part of this process of identifying an unknown war grave, and can't help feeling sad for David's mother, Agnes, his father George, and his wife Elizabeth, as they never got the chance to visit his grave. This little story reinforces the need to hold on to personal documents, which could then be handed to museums and archives where they can become accessible for researchers. If you'd like to see more Scottish horse artefacts and hear their stories, please visit our virtual museum, which is available on our website at www.historicdunkeld.org.uk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth. That was absolutely fascinating. So our next speaker is John Johnston from the Arbroath Signal Tower Museum in Angus Alive. And he has got a model of the Bell Rock Lighthouse. Let's take it away, John.
Gosh, thank you, Mel. My goodness, what a diverse range of objects we have in Tayside. Quite taken with Angus's Tutti Horn. I'm thinking that's a souvenir from the Jacobite Wars. But my name's John Johnston. I'm collections lead at Angus Alive Museums, and those that don't know, we're the trust that manages the public collections of Angus Council and Bath of folks in our area. And I'm going to say something today about an object we have in our Signal Tower Museum, which I hope you can see in the background in Arbroath. Our museum's home to objects and other items associated with the building of the Bell Rock Lighthouse, which we all remember as the oldest surviving sea-washed lighthouse in the British Isles, and possibly amongst the oldest in the world. And so much so that its method of construction was used by most of those lighthouses that followed. Gosh, it was one of the wonders of the age in which it was built, way back in 1811, really over 200 years ago, on the Inchcape Rock, that treacherous reef that blocks the path of shipping making for the River Tay in the port of Dundee. I guess we all also remember the rock as the Bell Rock, from the legendary bell supposedly placed there by the abbot of Aberbrothock way back in these far off times. And just to remember, way back in 1799, a big gale on the east coast of Scotland caused the loss of over 70 ships at the time, several on the Bell Rock Reef, which prompted the Lighthouse Board to mark the site for shipping at that time. And the young engineer Robert Stevenson surveyed the site and drew up the proposals for the lighthouse. And I'll just share something here. Yes, here's the light as it stands today, 11 miles off the shore, and there's a contemporary print of the lighthouse under its construction. Remember, no small feet at the time, when there are no power tools or even motors to carry vessels to the rock, very much in the days of sail, really only the days of sail, and it's amazing to think it was constructed with no modern construction aids at all. And our object is something of a surviving memento from the time of the building of the lighthouse. It's what you might call a presentation model of the lighthouse, and was made to order by the very designer himself, Robert Stevenson. Now, the model's not that large, it's just 50 centimetres in height, and if you look, shows several intriguing details, not least of which is a small bronze plaque on the model. It states on the plaque, and I quote, "A model presented to me by my daughter, Mrs. Warden. This model was cut from the rock at the conclusion of the works in the year 1810 and signed by Robert Stevenson. And this object remained in the Stevenson family until it appeared in auction around the time of the 200th anniversary of the building of the lighthouse, and was bought for our Angus Borough collections with help from the National Fund for Acquisitions. And I think that it's a favourite object we've brought to attention today because I think it survives almost as a powerful symbol of our engineering and seafaring heritage that connects us directly to the early 19th century, indeed to the people who designed and constructed the lighthouse. So that's our object for the Arbroath Signal Tower Museum. And if you'd like to see the actual model and other artifacts associated with the Bellrock Lighthouse, you can soon do this now that our museum is set to open again in the next few weeks as we recover from the coronavirus scourge. In fact, we're going to be open again from June the 1st. So I say do come, do visit us again, and we look forward to seeing you in Arbroath. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Really looking forward to being able to go back up and visit the museum. So next we have Jason Oliver and Fran Houston from the Scottish Cranach Centre, and they have a 2,500-year-old piece of textile.
Hello. The object that we're going to show you today is a piece of early Iron Age fabric from Oakbank Crannog here on Loch Tay in Perthshire, excavated in the 1980s. It is of hand-spun wool. It is plied. It is woven in what we call a 2-1 twill weave, and all of this points to the fragment being from a piece of clothing, something of quite high quality, rather than just a piece of crude tabby woven sacking or something like that. I'm going to show you the actual piece itself now. Bear with me while I pull it up to the camera for you. Most textile fragment survivals from prehistory are usually just individual threads that get snagged on brooches and pins. So to have a piece this big is really amazingly significant. And I will show you some photos of it now in closer detail. This is just a quick photo, first of all, of a crannog, just to show you what we're talking about. Crannogs are loch dwellings that you find from a very wide range of prehistory right through to the medieval period. As you can see, it's a substantial looking dwelling out on the water. And this is the actual photo that I was talking about of the piece close up. There's one photo of it. And there's another. You can see how absolutely glorious this fine piece of weave is. It really is something special. And there you can see the individual threads there as well. This is a very high quality, very finely made piece indeed. In March, I took the textile fragment to Glasgow University to Dr. Susanna Harris, who is seen here, extracting some threads for analysis. By the end of this summer, I will have a radiocarbon date for this piece. We will know how it's actually made. We'll know what the structure and the dimensions of the yarn and the weave are, and we will also get confirmation, hopefully, that it was sheep's wool, and we'll also get an idea of the quality of the fleece. We're fairly confident that it will be dated to 500 BC, but we will just do that dating just to be absolutely sure. And then we're going to do some further tests in the future that will tell us about any dye in the piece, the breed of the animal, and some ancient DNA analysis to tell us an idea of the genealogy of the animal as well. We've started to do an ancient textiles project here at the Crannog Centre, which is all inspired by this little fragment that we've got. And I'm going to hand over to Jason now, who's going to tell you some more.
The lab test at Glasgow will reveal much information about our textile, as Fran has just spoken about, but will also inform an ongoing experimental archaeological project to reconstruct the method of weaving and the possible loom setup that was possibly used during the period of the Crannog dwellers in the early Iron Age. One intriguing property of our textile is that, until now, this particular twill was unheard of in prehistoric Britain and didn't appear until much later in the archaeological record. The twill is called 2-1 twill. The horizontal yarn passes under 2 vertical or warp threads and then over 1 thread. The weave then progresses in such a fashion that on the next row, the whole pattern moves along to the right. creating a diagonal line that moves up the finished textile. You can see the same pattern in modern denim. This creates a strong, dense woven textile which can be used for a variety of garments, such as tunic and cloaks. As I just mentioned, the twill was not known to have been produced in Britain before the discovery of our textile, and appeared in the archaeological record in the 5th through 7th century in England, woven in wool, although this is incredibly rare. Prior to this period, and a bit closer to the date of Oakbank Crannog, it was discovered 1st to 4th century in the Western Roman Empire, the Eastern Mediterranean, and mid to late 3rd century in Roman era Spain. So our fragment has presented us with an enigma. Does it originate in Scotland, or could it have come from further afield, maybe opening up discussions around possible trade routes across Europe? If Scotland is the country of origin, does this suggest contact from further afield, with skills being passed on as people arrive to trade, or did knowledge of the construction of the twill emerge as a natural consequence of the skill of domestic textile producers in Scotland? All these questions add to the ongoing story of our textile, and we hope that the data from Glasgow will provide some insight into this mysterious fragment. Our fragment has been a springboard for much of the work we do in the textile area of our museum. Our textile doesn't exist in isolation from the rest of the collection. We also have a stone with a hole drilled through the centre, which has a possible interpretation of a loom weight for a warp-weighted loom. This interpretation has been tested over the last 2 years by creating such a loom and attempting with some success a reconstruction of the Crannog textile. Reflecting the independent and interdependent Crannog communities of 2,500 years ago, we drew on expertise from outside textile enthusiasts and members of the local community and spent 6 months working out how the twill could have been made. Experientially, this process demonstrated the complexity of knowledge the makers of the twill had at their disposal and showed us that we are constantly upskilling to the level of the people living in early Iron Age Scotland. Experimentally, we have moved away from the notion of a warp-weighted loom and are building a 2-beam loom, which we feel the twill will sit better on. We presented our findings to the International Experimental Archaeological Group, EXARC, at their World Conference in April, and have submitted a small test 2-beam loom to the World Touring EXARC exhibition, which we hope to host in our new museum at Daguerreotype in 5 years' time. Our textile is slowly unlocking its secrets over time, and the storytelling of this object enriches and deepens our knowledge about our collection, opening up research and connecting us both to a network of textile enthusiasts, academic and experiential interpretation and research, and directly to our local communities.
So thank you very much to the Crannog. We'll move on now. And next we have Neil Wernick from the Montrose Air Station Heritage Centre. And he has a Miles Hawk aircraft for us today. So
okay.
Take it away, Neil.
Yes, right. Thank you, Mel. I'll just get set up here. Okay, so I'm Neil Wernick, and I'm Secretary of Montrose Air Station Heritage Centre. So our museum has been open since the end of April. We are open at the weekends only at the moment, from Friday, Saturday and Sunday. But anyway, this afternoon, I'm going to tell you about the hawk that landed at Montrose Air Station. The hawk in question is our Miles M28 Hawk Major. That's her in the yellow, by the way. It is a rare aircraft from the 1930s, which landed at Montrose Air Station Heritage Centre in 2017. It was declared surplus to requirements by the RAF Museum in London. There'd been a lot of interest by aviation museums in this machine, one of only 2 that we know to be in existence. So it was a real achievement for a small museum like ours, run entirely by volunteers, to be able to convince one of the largest museums in Britain that we had the capability to look after this rare aircraft and display it to the visiting public. Originally, it was registered as GADMW, and it was delivered to Heston in 1935. and went on to fly with Portsmouth Aero Club until 1939, when it was impressed into RAF service as DG 590. In 1946, it went back to Miles Aircraft for some refurbishment and was then used by Reading Aero Club. And by 1952, it was based at Sleep in Shropshire and continued there until it was withdrawn from use in July 1965, when it joined the RAF Museum collection. When it arrived at Montrose, in the back of a van with the wings and tailplane removed, it had been in storage for many years and was not in great condition. Some panels were also missing. After our volunteers reassembled it, we put it on display representing pilot training at Montrose, at RAF Montrose. The Hawk was designed by F.G. Miles, one of the most prolific aircraft designers in Britain at the time, and was a very advanced concept for the day, at a time when nearly all the aircraft in the RAF were still fabric-covered biplanes. This aircraft is a twin-seat lightweight monoplane with the airframe largely composed of spruce and with the exterior being covered by a combination of birch and ply. The RAF soon realized that new aircraft coming into service, like the Spitfire and Hurricane, needed much more modern aircraft to train pilots to fly them. And with a few modifications, the Hawk became the Miles Magister. And this type saw extensive service at Montrose. The Miles Company even had its own maintenance and repair facilities at the air station. The close links between Montrose Air Station and Miles Aircraft make the Hawk a very important acquisition for us in telling the story of RAF Montrose during the Second World War. 2 years ago, we decided to do a complete restoration of the aircraft. The wings were removed and it was moved to the workshop. The engine was also removed and overhauled. The engine is a de Havilland Gypsy Major engine. It's 6 litres, a 4-cylinder, air-cooled, inverted inline engine of 200 horsepower. We took it out of the aircraft. We took it fairly apart. We had the cylinders off, and it's probably in as good a condition. It doesn't run, but it possibly could. Some other features of the Hawk. It had a maximum speed of 150 miles an hour. Its range was 560 miles, and the service ceiling up at 20,000 feet. But for the pandemic, we would have finished the restoration last year. However, it is well advanced, although we had to stop again in December. I think I took this picture just really the week before we stopped in December. And we've just restarted. This picture was taken just earlier this week. And save any further lockdowns, we should have it finished probably late summer or certainly by the later part of the year. So this is how it should look more or less at the end of its restoration, which I say hopefully will be later in the year. So I hope if you get the chance, you will come and see us at Montrose. I mentioned we are open just at weekend. You can actually book us visits to us on Facebook, or indeed we'll take people that will just turn up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. What an absolutely fantastic object. Really can't wait to go up and see it. So our final speaker today is Kirsty Hassard from the Victoria and Albert Museum in Dundee. And she is speaking today about the Jacobite fan, which she has on display at the museum. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you. Thanks, Mel. And thank you for Matthew for organising today. It's been so fascinating to hear about everyone's objects. Yeah, I'm the final speaker, and I think there's definitely some themes that have been emerging through it, definitely ones of Jacobite, so it just seems quite fitting that I'm concluding with this. Yeah, so at V&A Dundee, we've been opened since the 1st of May with our new exhibition, Night Fever. We're opened from Thursdays through to Mondays, but rather than our new exhibition, I'm talking about an object that is in our Scottish Design Galleries. That's a Jacobite fan that is on loan to us from V&A, South Kensington, so from the V&A collection. It dates from 1745, it's engraved, and I'll give you a better view of it here. It dates from 1745, engraved, shows a man in armour in the centre that's supposed to be Charles Edward Stuart, supported by Mars and Minerva. And there's neoclassical symbols on either side that were added in at a later date that I'll go on to talk about later. The reason I chose to talk about this object today is actually more of a personal interest, to be honest. A lot of my interest has been on fans, but primarily their use as political propaganda for women in the 18th century. The 18th century is actually called the century of the political fan, but also the process of making them. In one object like this, you've really got 4 or 5 different industries that are all involved and all interlinked, whether that's so to give you a bit of a terminology around fans, whether it's making the sticks, which are these here, or the guards, which is the ivory here, the decoration on the leaf, which is the decoration, the imagery that you see, and assembling them together, and then somebody else that would sell them. So the context is hugely important to the fan. Surrounded by a great amount of mythology, but supposedly used at the Ball of Holyrood after the Battle of Preston Pans in September 1745. A Holyrood house where Charles Edward Stuart had held court for 6 weeks during the autumn of 1745 and referred to as his little hour of royalty. And the legend has it that these fans were distributed by him to the ladies who attended the ball. Originally, when I was doing research on it, I thought there was only 3 of them that survived, but actually I've came across another one in my research that I'll go on to talk about. So it was made by this man who's incredibly interesting in his own right. The man on the left, Robert Strange, who was a Jacobite, fought with the Jacobites, but was also an artist and was responsible for a lot of Jacobite propaganda. He made the miniature of Charles Edward Stuart, and he also made Jacobite banknotes that you see in the bottom right-hand corner with the design of the rose and the thistle that were never used, made prior to the Battle of Culloden. And his later career, incredibly interesting because he ends up in London and becomes knighted by King George III. He was the only engraver in the 18th century to be given this honour. And the history of the fan, the object history, is hugely interesting, especially the V&A one that is, and especially in comparison to these 4 other ones that have ended up in the collections of the British Museum, the Fan Museum, the West Highland Museum, and the National Museum of Scotland. The V&A example, as you can see to all of these, is different because if you remember back to the original image, the V&A one has been painted over on either side, whereas these 4 other ones still have the original imagery, which shows the family of King George II being pursued by the Jacobite forces. So this goes back to the use of these fans. Primarily at this point, they're used as tools to convey a message to the viewer. The symbolism is hugely important. And sometimes you see direct links between contemporary print culture and the imagery that's used. It's essentially they're a way for women to participate in a predominantly masculine sphere of political culture and current events. Obviously, so much of it is entirely dependent on how the symbolism is interpreted, and a lot of the time the fans had more neutral imagery on the reverse that meant that the lady who was using it could turn it around if she ended up in company that wasn't so sympathetic to the views that she was representing. The ones that you see here are obviously quite valuable objects. They're hand painted, they're mounted on ivory, and the V&A one, obviously the person who ended up with it in their possession after the Jacobite uprising wanted to continue using it despite the quite dangerous imagery on it, hence the overpainting. And the other spectrum of political fans is often they're made really cheaply from paper and from wood. And this is actually quite common. They could easily be customized, overpainted like my example, or the leaf, this part here, could be ripped off, and then you could have a different leaf mounted on the sticks. to represent a different moment in time. They're incredibly ephemeral objects, and that's the reason why so few of them, the paper ones that is, survive into museum collections. And just to conclude, obviously the material culture of the Jacobites is an incredibly wide and well-studied subject, but it's a really interesting example of how women at that time were able to pursue political agency using fashionable objects. So for example, on the left, we've got a beautiful dress that's in the collection of National Museums Scotland. This was supposedly worn by Margaret Oliphant, again, supposedly to the Holyrood Ball, and the imagery on it is very Jacobite centric. And then also a garter that is on display with us again in V&A Dundee, on loan from V&A Kensington, that had Jacobite symbolism and imagery and through it. I think that's my type up, but thank you very much. And yeah, any questions at all, please direct them to my email that you see there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Kirsty. Really fascinating to think about the links between fashion and politics there. And so I'd just like to say a big thank you to everybody. It's been a really enjoyable afternoon. I feel like I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Cheerio.